Today's video is going to be another one in my series of making lemonade from lemons because something went awry on a recent project. So my goal was to make this lovely deflected double weave wrap in a pattern from Valley Yarns, also known as Webs or yarn.com. And I did my usual thing of getting the yarn and putting it in a bin. And I have learned this trick from years in manufacturing that and knitting and everything else I do, that if I put together all the elements in a single box, uh, all the elements for a project in a single box, whether it's a knitting bag or weaving yarns or something else, whatever it is. I'll put my uncut fabric and the sewing thread and the trims or the elastic or whatever else, whatever project it is. If I put everything in some kind of container, be it a bag, a bin, a basket, whatever, then I don't have to worry that I'm missing something when I go to actually sit down and start it. This is akin to the cooking practice of mise en place that uh, chefs use, that they put all the ingredients together so they know they've got enough of everything and don't run into unpleasant surprises. So I did that for this particular project, but then as it turned out, I kept changing my mind about the colors I was going to use. And somewhere down the line, I either miscalculated how much yarn I was going to use as I recolored this project, or I misplaced one of the skeins of yarn. So I wound warp chains thinking that the lighter blue here was going to be the dominant color in my scarf. And when I finished winding the warp chains, oh my gosh, I had used up almost all of the yarn that I had. And you'll notice from the tag, it's Jagger spun. I can't get this anymore because this company doesn't exist anymore. So there's simply no way to get more. Unlike the great big cones of Tencel that are also part of this project, these I probably can get more if I even need it because they come on these honkin' big cones. So now I'm in the predicament of trying to figure out what to do with these warp chains that I have already wound. And my first impulse was to just go ahead and use these warp chains and try and do this pattern, but change what I did with the colors. Sorry, which just to use the darker blue, which you can't see because I've zoomed in so far, use the darker blue in the weft instead of the lighter blue. But upon reflection, it turned out to be a bad idea. I felt that I was going to have, that this project was not going to turn out the way I wanted, by which I mean that this is what's called a deflected double weave project, which is one of the only ways to get circular sorts of motifs easily into your weaving. Because the weave structure, as you weave it, this is not plain old double weave, which makes a two-layer fabric. This is deflected double weave. So because of the way the loom is threaded, the heddles are threaded, as you weave, certain yarns just curve away, either up or down or to the sides, creating these circular shapes. And as I hope you can see from this black and white photo, this makes a particular pattern. And if I changed the colors, if I used a lighter blue in the warp, but then the darker blue in the weft, those beautiful, what look like circles that are all in one color or mostly in one color, as it turns out, would get interrupted. They would be disrupted. So I have opted to do a different thing. And in fact, I think that my solution will help me out. because many, not all, but almost all, deflected double weave projects rely on something called differential shrinkage, which means that you use yarns of different materials that are going to shrink differently in the wet finishing process. And this is part of what causes this design to have its distinctive X's and O's. So my yarn is a mix. All the yarn in this project is a mix. These cones are tencel, which is not going to be affected at all in wet finishing, or very little. And then the contrast yarns are silk merino zephyr from Jaggerspun, which, as I mentioned before, is no longer available because the company closed its doors. So my solution to this problem is to first focus on differential shrinkage. So I've got these warp chains wound using the lighter blue zephyr as my main zephyr color. And I'm just going to warp up the yarn on the loom in what's called a straight draw. The yarn will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, all along its width. And then I'm just going to weave a plain weave scarf. And the weft will be, again, a combination of tencel, which I've got plenty of, and actually, I'm just going to do the tencel. So I will have a mixed fiber warp and a tencel weft. And when I wet finish it, they're going to respond in different ways to the process. In fact, my wet finishing can get even more vigorous. The instructions for this project say to just wash by hand, but I have a dedicated plunger that I leave just for weaving projects or fiber projects. And as I'm washing this by hand in a dishpan, I can use the plunger to add more agitation so that the silk and wool will shrink up even more. So a simple plain weave project will give me a clearer sense of how these yarns are going to play with each other. And then I will warp up the yarn with for the deflected double weave. And I will know a lot more when that happens. I'll know more about how these yarns are going to interact. I will also have a sense. I keep hearing rumbles that you should never use tencel as warp because it just can't stand up to it. So after I have done this mixed warp, I will have a clearer sense of whether that is true or not, or whether there are ways to safeguard against yarn breakage. I have used tencel warp before, and the first time I tried it, it was a disaster. There was so much friction that the yarn just kind of fuzzed itself away. But when I rewarped with a different brand of yarn, as long as I religiously advanced my warp every inch of weaving, it turned out fine. I had, I think, no yarn breakage because I was paying so much attention to advancing my warp. So one way out of a lemon problem is to figure out how you could reuse warp chains in a slightly different way and just see what happens. So let's take a quick look at my, if I can find them quickly, my, here we go, my cross area on these yarns. Let's zoom in so we can get a closer picture. Okay, so I wound my chains the way I usually do, which was this project has a really specific and slightly intricate warp color order. And so I did each repeat of the warp color order tied off with its own cross of my counting thread. I also figured in a floating salvage because floating salvages when you're doing a project like this are just going to save the day. So while this will look nothing like the pattern, it will still make a very lovely striped pattern. And with this light blue tencel weft, it'll be nice and shiny, and I think it's going to turn out really nicely, even if it wasn't what I was expecting. I have heard it said that true mastery comes from not only knowing that you've made a mistake in whatever task it is you're trying to achieve, but that you can come up with a solution to get around it. And my solution is just to do a completely different project. So this is the set of chains I just wove. And I did actually, for a few minutes, think about trying to fix these chains by warping everything except the light blue zephyr and then rewarping with dark blue zephyr. And that idea just seemed like a freaking disaster. So my solution to this is to try a different project and see where it takes me. And of course, I will let you all know how it all turns out when I am done.